Hey friends, I thought that I would read a Hanukkah book to you. Now, the one I wanted to read I couldn't find, but I thought this one was pretty funny. And I really like this one too because it is entitled Mrs. Greenberg's Messy Hanukkah. And in Miss Kenesha and Miss Sharon's room, we have somebody whose last name is Greenberg. Can anybody guess who his name is? All right, I'll let you think about that one. But Mrs. Greenberg's Messy Hanukkah was written by Linda Glazier, and the illustrations are by Nancy Coate. Here's the cover of it. Alrighty. Please, can we make potato latkes today? Rachel sat at the kitchen table, swinging her legs. And let's invite Mrs. Greenberg for dinner. Enough with the latkes. Mama threw her hands in the air. I told you already. We'll make them next week when the relatives come. That's when we'll invite Mrs. Greenberg. She's really excited, I think, for Hanukkah. But tonight won't even feel like the first night of Hanukkah. Rachel took the menorah from the cupboard and she pushed the first two candles in. No latkes, no company. Well, we'll still light the candles. Mama kissed her on her nose. It'll be Hanukkah, don't worry, but right now, Pop and I have lots of errands, so please get your coat on. Rachel set the menorah on her windowsill. It was such a cold, gray day out there. Just the kind that begged to make the house all warm and good smelling. That gave her an idea. Can I stay next door with Mrs. Greenberg? Oh dear, it doesn't sound like Mrs. Greenberg is ready for all of this. All afternoon? Mama shook her head. Please, asked Rachel. She's not so used to little monkeys like you. Papa gave Rachel a playful poke. But it's almost Hanukkah and she's all alone. Rachel pointed out she could use a little bit of company. I didn't think of that. Well, I suppose, Mama looked at Papa, if you won't be any trouble for Mrs. Greenberg. I'm never any trouble. Rachel pulled on her coat and she raced out the door, and her hair was flying. Wait, Mama called after her. I'll telephone just to make sure. But Rachel was already skipping down the path. Mrs. Greenberg's house was all clean and sparkly, like it was just waiting for company, while Rachel's house always looked like it was still in bed with its hair all sticking up. And Mrs. Greenberg was always glad to see her. Come in, don't be a stranger, said Mrs. Greenberg. I told your dear Mama, of course you can stay. It's much too empty around here, especially for Hanukkah. Rachel stepped inside. That's just what I told her. And she peeled off her coat. Can we make latkes today? Oh my, said Mrs. Greenberg. I haven't made latkes in years. But latkes make it feel like Hanukkah, Rachel explained. It's a messy job, said Mrs. Greenberg. All that grating and frying. But Mama and Papa would be so surprised, Rachel jumped up in the air and said. I didn't think of that. I do have plenty of potatoes. Wonderful, Rachel exclaimed, and she skipped into the kitchen where everything had its very own place, and it was all sparkly, even the floor. Uh-oh. So the house is nice and clean, and the book is called Mrs. Greenberg's Messy Hanukkah. This will end badly. Mrs. Greenberg handed her an apron and they both got right to work grating potatoes. Rachel tried to keep her gratings in a nice little hill like Mrs. Greenberg's, but somehow her little hill slid right off the table. Oops, said Rachel. Oi, said Mrs. Greenberg. It looks like they've got potatoes, onions, oil, salt, and here these are graters, and they're moving the potatoes up and down the grater so they can make them nice and shredded. What a mushy mess. Rachel grabbed the bucket and the mop, but the more she mopped, the worse it got. That's okay, Mrs. Greenberg said, taking the mop. I'll finish later. Don't you worry. After all, what's a little grated potatoes between friends? Oh no. So far, potatoes have made a mess. But it was an accident though, so I don't know. I don't know what else could happen. Next, it was time for the egg. Rachel tried to crack it into the bowl, just like Mama always does, but somehow it popped right out of her hands. Oops, said Rachel. Oi, said Mrs. Greenberg. What a slippery mess. So Rachel grabbed the bucket and the mop, but the more she mopped, the worse it got. That's fine. I'll finish later, Mrs. Greenberg said, stepping over the yellow, shiny streaks in the floor. Don't you worry. After all, what's a little egg between friends? But she gave a sigh. She's probably thinking about how the nice, clean, sparkling floor is now all messy. She's not going to say anything, I don't think. Soon we'll have Hanukkah latkes, Rachel reminded her. Mrs. Greenberg stirred everything into the big bowl, and Rachel lugged over a big bag of flour. Don't we need this? But somehow the bag ripped. Oops, said Rachel. Oi, said Mrs. Greenberg. What a powdery mess. So again, Rachel grabbed the bucket and the mop. But the more she mopped, the worse it got. Never mind. I'll get it later, said Mrs. Greenberg. Don't you worry. After all, what's a little flour between friends? But she was looking pretty tired now. Soon it'll feel like Hanukkah, Rachel reminded her, and she sure hoped it would. At last, it was time to fry the latkes. Mrs. Greenberg checked the clock. Your mama and your papa will be here any minute. Quick, Rachel, drizzle a little oil into the pan. Mama uses lots of oil, says Rachel, for the miracle of when the oil lasted 8 nights. But somehow the oil came spurting out faster than Rachel had expected. Much faster. Oops. What a sloppy mess. Rachel reached for the bucket and the mop. Don't even bother, Mrs. Greenberg said as she sank into her chair in the living room. Oh my goodness. I think she's just gonna let it all happen now. It's already a mess. What's a little oil now? Just let me rest a few more minutes. Anyway, what's a little oil after all this? And she flung her arms up into the air. Rachel waited for the part about friends, but there wasn't a word this time. And nothing about don't you worry either. Uh-oh. The kitchen started to look like quite a mess. Like it might faint if it looked at itself in the mirror. What would Mama and Papa say? And just then the back door opened. Hello, anybody home? Called Papa. Mama stepped into the kitchen. Oh, no. Surprise, squeaked Rachel, trying to smile. We're making latkes. Mama and Papa did look surprised, but not the way that Rachel had hoped. Not at all. Papa pointed at the floor. What is all of this? Mama frowned. Rachel, look what you've done. Rachel's chin trembled like she was going to cry. Well, I wanted to make it feel like Hanukkah, but I made a terrible mess. And a tear fell down her nose. I'm sorry. Oh, look, Mrs. Greenberg's getting up now. This is the part where she says what's a little mess between friends, I'm sure of it. Mrs. Greenberg hurried over. Oh, Rachel, you dear little duck. She rubbed the tear away with her thumb. Actually, it's not a terrible mess. It's a wonderful mess. My house hasn't felt this lived in years. Really? Rachel brightened up. Well, I can make it lived in any time you want. Mrs. Greenberg laughed out loud. Oh, darling, I'm sure you can. Rachel grabbed the bucket and the mop. Now, let's really clean up. I'll do it later, said Mrs. Greenberg. Don't be silly, said Papa. Sit down, relax, please. That's right, said Rachel. We want to do it. Mama tied on the apron, fried up those latkes crispy and hot, and while Rachel and Papa cleaned up, the house was now starting to feel sparkly, warm, and good smelling. Mrs. Greenberg lit the candles and said the blessings, and finally everything was just as Rachel had imagined it. Oh, thank you, Mrs. Greenberg, she beamed. Don't thank me. Thank you, Mrs. Greenberg grandly said as she set the latkes on the table. I've got latkes and company. You sure do. Rachel hugged Mrs. Greenberg around her nice soft middle and gave her a happy sigh. Now this feels like Hanukkah. And that is the end. Now, I am reading this book on the Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday. This is Tuesday. So tonight, everybody should be lighting their 6th candle on their Hanukkah menorah. And I would love to wish you all a very, very happy Hanukkah. Thanks for joining me for the story time, guys.